highlighting student realities around violence, gender roles, and identities. I am truly honored to be part of this KIP conference and to actually working on such an important topic and contributing to this whole conversation that's happening today at OSB. And I am even more honored to be moderating this panel in particular that deals directly with our students here at AUB and students in Lebanon in general. I'm going to introduce you the speakers before their talks, and then I'm going to leave the Q&A till the very end. So please, if you do have some questions, write them down and we'll take them at the very end. I'd like to first introduce Dr. Rozan Saad Khalaf, who's an associate professor of creative writing at AUB, and she actually designed and launched the first creative writing courses in the Department of English. I came to AUB from a French school, so speaking in English was always difficult to me, and it was this class in particular, the creative writing class with Dr. Rozan Saad Khalaf, that made the whole difference in my life and made me become more confident in using this language to express myself and express abstract concepts that are happening in my mind. Dr. Khalaf is the author of and editor of around 8 books, some of which are about women, for example, hikayat, short stories by Lebanese women, and currently she's working on an anthology of Arab women writers, and I cannot wait to read more about it actually once it's out. But today she's going to be talking to us about something a little bit different. She's going to be bringing in the perspective of her students, particularly those who are taking the creative nonfiction class with her. These students have been crafting sensitive and daring narratives, and she's going to be sharing some of these with us today. Dr. Khalaf.
As one of my good students. What I'm going to be doing today, I only have 15 minutes, unfortunately, but I'd like to share some voices of my students with you. For many years now, in creative nonfiction, I've been extremely moved by their daring memoirs that deal with sexual harassment, whether they're women or men. It's very brave of them to write about topics like this, to focus on these themes. I've also noticed an enormous change over the years. Years ago, they wouldn't dare to tread into such territory, but lately they've been bold, they've been daring, they've been eager to address these experiences that have happened to them. And it's quite a challenge to relocate such painful experiences to the creative writing classroom, to actually share the experiences with other students. And to write these daring bold memoirs. I want to say that some years ago, most of my students had what I call the Humpty Dumpty mindset or syndrome. When Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall, all the king's horses, all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Well, not anymore. And I quote from one of my students. She says, when experiences break us and we put ourselves back together again, we're never completely the same. We're always bent and cracked, and it's through these cracks that new possibilities and challenges surface. I have 4 student voices that I would like to share with you. I don't have time to do that, so I'm hoping to get through 2 of them. One is a young woman who was raped by a relative before she came to AUB, and her parents, who were quite missionary and prudish, were not interested in hearing her story. They blamed her for the rape. They told her it was entirely her fault, even though she tried to fend him off unsuccessfully. And I think what's interesting about this story is that I got her to write her memoir in the form of letters addressed to her parents and addressed to her aggressor, telling them all the things that she's been wanting to tell them but hasn't been able to, simply because they won't listen to her. What's also interesting about her honest confessions is that she centers herself in her own narrative, which is something I'm seeing recently, and I think it's very daring. For decades, stories have explored rapes of women, then directed their attention to some man's story instead. And with my female students, we're just beginning to see what it looks like when the lens doesn't turn away from these women and their stories and the pain that they want to share and explore. And I'm going to read from her letters to her parents. Do you know who Fadi is, Dad? Do you know what he's repeatedly done to your daughter, to your baby? Fadi is my rapist. I wish he didn't have a name. I wish he didn't have a face and a figure. I wish he didn't have the attributes of a human, because he isn't one. There he was again, day after day, for nearly 3 months, standing at our doorstep, saying goodbye, peeking left and right to make sure no one's watching, stealing a kiss with lustful eyes and lips. Just minutes ago, he had me pinned face down on the bed I grew up sleeping in, his massive body throbbing with ecstasy, sweating on my back, the back of my neck. Just minutes ago, I was shouting at the top of my lungs, begging him to stop. Just minutes ago, no one came to my rescue. How did you do it, Mom interrupted my thoughts, breaking the silence. When I didn't know how to respond, when I shuddered for the millionth time, she sharpened her tone and repeated her question. I knew I had to answer. How did I do what, Mom? I tried to compose a full sentence. Stop it, she roared. You're testing the limits of my patience. Mama, I don't understand. What do you mean, you don't understand? Do I need to draw you a picture? I lowered my head. I knew what she was talking about. I understood. I was so ashamed of myself for what he had forced me to do. My heart didn't thump this time. I didn't feel a choking pain around my throat or a cloudy dizziness. I heard a numb ringing in my ears. Did he go inside, she said. I slowly shook my head, yes. She paused a minute to absorb my nod. I shivered. God, so it's true, she raged. What's true? What happens here is that this student confides in her best friend and cousin, and her best friend and cousin goes and tells her parents that she was complicit in the rape. She doesn't bother to tell the parents of the students the truth. And so this further outrages my student, who I will call Hannah, because she says, I'm sure she knew, but she did not tell my mother the truth. Mom decided she wasn't quite done scarring me for life. You just shaved off years of my life with what you did. Do you know that? Do you know what your father did when he heard the news? What? I dared not lift my eyes from the floor. He took off his slipper and started hitting himself on the head with it. He said, this is not the daughter he raised. You are not his daughter. I choked, I couldn't breathe. I felt like someone had shoved a cluster of gravel down my throat. I didn't cry. I was too stunned to cry. He wanted to disown you, my mother said. And this is a letter to her mother and father. Dear Mom and Dad, I tried to kill myself yesterday. I realized my presence was causing the family too much shame. I wanted to relieve you from the burden of my existence. Would you miss me if I slit my wrists right now? I wanted to kill myself today too. I know that your life would fall back into place if I disappeared. I know that sometimes you wish you had never prayed for the miracle daughter you thought I would be. I know I am no longer that miracle. I know I am nothing but a burden. I know it took every inch and will in you not to kill me to preserve your honor. But you know what? I didn't kill myself today. I told myself I was too scared to pierce my own flesh. I wasn't. I simply didn't want you to live with the guilt and crimson stain on my pink carpet. And then what's interesting about this student in particular is that she goes on to put her life together. She puts the pieces together when she comes to AUB. And then she addresses her rapist in a letter, as well as her parents in a letter. And when she addresses her rapist, she says, people expect me to be angry with you, Fadi. I'm not. Anger takes up too much a part of me. I am not angry with you. No, I pity you. And she goes on to tell him how her life was coming to AUB, becoming educated, putting the pieces together, moving on, where his life was staying in the same traditional ossified place where he couldn't move on. He had to have an arranged marriage. He had to have children that he didn't necessarily care for. And she concludes by saying, dear Fadi, but that's not why I hate you. I hate you because you distorted reality for me. You twisted me into all the impurities I'd become, pushing me headfast into that spotlight of shame. You sabotaged my perception of the world, but that's not why I hate you. I hate you because I can no longer feel physically safe with any male. Men represent one thing to me today, and that is danger. You distorted my image of what sex ought to be, of what love is. You took a child who was absolutely clueless about the world around her and sexualized her into the most corrupt and twisted ways imaginable. Then you called it love. I hate you. I hate you because you damaged me, and I learned to bury you in the depths of my own hell. The next powerful story I'd like to share with you is actually a rape that happened to one of my male students. And I think we ought to acknowledge that, that men are also subjected to rape. Karim's narrative is interesting because his thoughts move back and forth between the actual rape scene that took place, how it changed his life, and the role that his parents played. And he starts by describing what happened to him. A close family friend took him to show him a military base, but he soon realized he wasn't showing him that base. I want to show you something, Karim. We had reached our destination. Come, he carelessly ushered with his hand. And then he says, his eyes betrayed his reassuring voice for a second. They bulged out, and I should have realized something was odd. But he was Yusuf, I thought, the reliable laughter over wine glasses, the Ralph Lauren-clad family friend, labeled a hazel-eyed beauty. So he takes him actually into the forest, and he rapes him. And all the time, this young man is thinking, why did my mother insist that I go? Was she so clueless about what this man is like? Yeah, sure, definitely go, she said only a few hours earlier. She'd spent a year before reprimanding me for my beanbag posture. And so he talks at length about the cluelessness of his mother and the disengagement of his father in this particular case. And he also talks about how after this rape, he was terrified that he had contracted AIDS. And he describes in horrifying terms how he went to the hospital to be tested, how he had to keep this away from his parents. And what's interesting about this story, I don't have time to read it, although it's quite powerful, is that he explores the trauma of rape that stays with him, and the irreparable damage that it's caused. But the effects in his case are very lasting and complex because his post-rape choice is to actually build himself up into a muscle man. And that's what he was doing when he came to my class and started writing his memoir, because he felt that he would gain revenge. He wanted a rape revenge on this older man who had actually ruined his life. So the psychological consequences were quite lasting and quite destructive in his case. I see I have to conclude now, so I want to conclude by making 2 points. At the moment, my students are in a very strange space of skepticism and hope. It's a peculiar combination. They're boldly framing their own stories, but they're acutely aware that their voices are often lost to either insensitive, callous communities or to an older generation that remains ossified by denial. And not being considered a serious sector in society makes them actually question the ability of their voices to bring change or drive policy research. And yet, ironically, there's no better way for governments and policy makers to touch the future than by listening to the voices of these articulate and daring young change makers. Thank you.
I have to say that these narratives shattered me in many ways, but at the same time, I feel so proud and privileged to be part of an institution that provides the opportunity for its students to express themselves and to use education and language and everything that AUB gives them to deal with their own struggles and problems. I'm very proud to introduce to you Dr. Lina, my childhood friend, who I met again actually here when I came back to AUB, and this is the KIP Conference. Thank you for putting us together in the same panel. So Liliane is also spending a lot of her time trying to better understand the context of youth. She's looking at alcoholism and alcohol consumption among youth, and also she's in general interested in the mental health of youth in Lebanon, and particularly in the interplay between youth, sexual and mental health. She actually is currently working on two major projects, one of them funded by the IDRC, that focuses on identifying local evidence of alcohol harm reduction policy in Lebanon, and another one from the Ford Foundation where she's focusing on advocating for the promotion of youth reproductive and sexual health and sexuality education. Please, Dr. Liliane.
Micro.
Seriously, when Dr. Khaled presented, sorry, yes, I have a loud voice. So I'm still actually shaking from what I just heard, but I think it's important to, for her talk to have preceded mine, because I'm not going to preach to the choir about the background or the importance of gender roles and gender discrimination and sexual violence, nor am I going to be focusing a lot on what's next. What I'll be focusing on is data that we have from AUB University students in a quantitative sense. And so now, but when I say 15% and 17% and 20%, it's quite easy for us to just say it and move on. But now, you just 20%, or let's say 100 people, are going to be 100 of those Karims or 100 of those young Iraqi person. And so, which is why I am happy that your talk preceded mine, because it gives meaning to the numbers that I'm about to present to you. Okay. I'll start with a riddle. For those of you who don't know the riddle, don't speak. But I heard it recently, and I thought it would be a good way to start this conference. So, a young boy and his father were in a horrible car crash and were rushed into the ER. Just as he's about to go under the knife, the surgeon says, "I can't operate, that boy is my son." What comes to mind? Who's the surgeon?
The mother.
But the father was rushed to the hospital. Okay, good. So this audience is actually way more educated than the research study where this riddle was actually. I fell into the trap. I kept thinking the stepfather, maybe this is a stepchild, and I'm an advocate for women's rights. Okay, so obviously this research was conducted at Boston University, and it was conducted with 197 BU psychology students, and another study among 103 children aged 7 to 17. And the answers were, the majority didn't say mom. The majority said the surgeon was a robot, or a ghost, or they even thought that the father meant the priest, the person that had been rushed into the hospital. I am particularly interested with one answer that my husband gave me, which is the surgeon was horribly confused. No, wait, not this one. That basically the father was not that hurt, and he was, able to get up and say, I can't operate on my child because my child. So it was a little bit more creative than the answers we got here. And quite interestingly is that even if you would switch it and think of the nurse saying that I can't take care of this child, few people think of the nurse as the dad, and most people think of the nurse as the mom. So all this gender stereotyping are socially constructed, as we all know. And and these power inequalities are one of the main underlying reasons for why we see this, or we see sexual violence becoming more and more prevalent among women than men. But also, I'm glad that Kareem's story came out, because I'll be showing the data also among the male counterparts. Sexual violence is a significant public health issue that impacts many people, but data, especially from westernized countries, show that college and university students are particularly at risk. This is data from WHO that says in our region we have 1 in 3 women subjected to some kind of violence. Okay, and obviously we all know what the negative health impacts of that is. If we focus on the 15 to 19-year-olds, in our region, the data is 1 in 4. Again, this is WHO data. This is a study that I found interesting. It was among 5,000 high school students from Kuwait. And as you can see, these are different types of reports of sexual violence and abuse. And as you can see, you have higher numbers among the males than the females. And again, one needs to stop and ponder whether this is an actual true difference, or that women are less likely to report or maybe fear reporting. But in both cases, it's a substantial proportion of the students that are reporting these kinds of acts. This is data from the Global School Health Survey. This is a study that's conducted in Lebanon and other developing countries among middle school students. And this is the percent reported been made fun of with sexual jokes, comments, or gestures. And as you can see, though the total hasn't changed between 2005 and 2011, the study was conducted in 2 years. It's funded by CTC and WHO Lebanon, and has been conducted in collaboration with the Ministry of Higher Education in Lebanon. But the percentage of women has increased over the 2 time points. And there's also data on child sexual abuse from Lebanon, and that says that basically 20% those that reported to primary healthcare centers and social service centers during the Hezbollah-Israeli war, 20% reported an incident of sexual abuse. And as Dr. Khalaf mentioned, I was shocked by the percentage of parents that were not supportive of their children when they came forth and they told them. So half reported the incident to their parents, but as you can see, not as many got All right, so for the next remaining number of minutes, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about what 10 minutes. What AEP students told us as part of an online quantitative survey that took place in 2012. As part of the Youth Sexual and Reproductive Health Team and Working Group at FHS and beyond FHS. So I'm happy to say that we're all here, not all of us actually, but myself, Dr. Faisal Al-Kak, and Noura, and we also have a collaborator that's now working on her own thing, but as a team we've been able to accomplish a lot, and we are collaborating with many other stakeholders into pushing this work forward. This work has come as 3 phases, and we're in phase 3 right now. The data that I'll be presenting you is from an online survey in 2012, but we're planning another one in fall of 2017. So we sent out the survey to all AEB students in 2012, and we got 2,182 completed surveys, which was, according to the IT, quite a favorable response of 30-35% at the time. We sent out the questionnaire in both English and in Arabic, The questionnaire was obviously IRB and HRPP approved, and there were several sections to it. This is, so obviously with online surveys, we have a self-selection. So as an epidemiologist, I mean, we have to wonder who decided to participate versus not participate. But this is quite a diverse group of people who have participated. So you can see from different majors, different educational levels, and different nationalities, but the majority were Lebanese. So the first question that we asked ourselves, are there gender differences in non-consensual sexual experiences and sexual abuse? And as you can see, this is the odds ratio, which was basically comparing females to males. So how more likely are females compared to males to experience any one of those experiences? So done anything sexual you didn't really want to do. So females were twice more likely to report that than their male counterparts at ABB. And this is controlling for things that we think might, confuse the findings or confound the findings, which is religiosity, education level, faculty, current relationship status, living situation, and tuition source. Women were also more likely to say they have been in a relationship where things were moving too fast physically. They were also more likely to be unwilling at sexual debut. They were 3.5 times more likely to report that they've ever been sexually abused. And sexual abuse was someone, we asked them whether someone did something to you sexually which you didn't want them to do, or touched you in a way that did not want to be touched. And they were also, quite importantly, 2 times more likely to say, I'd rather not say if I was ever sexually abused, because we had that option in all questions, whether they would rather not give an answer. Then we asked them about communication, and so we can see that male students were more at ease to talk to their father or male guardians, females to their mother guardians, males more likely to talk to their close friends, and equally likely to talk to sexual partners. What about gender differences among those who are non-sexually active? And I realize here the definition might be a little bit, there are limitations to the definition, but we considered anyone who said, I have not engaged in oral, anal, or vaginal sex as non-sexually active. And we asked about the other non-penetrative sexual practices and values. I'll skip the importance of looking at that, but we know that there are gender differences in the context of sexual debut and also how they're judged unequally in our context. So think about among the non-sexually active students, which are about 1,895, we asked about reasons for postponing sexual debut. And as you can see, for example, again, females compared to males, twice more likely to say, I would feel guilty afterwards, my parents would not approve, it is socially unacceptable to do so before marriage, and it against my religion. And knowing they are in the same context and, and in the same culture, and, the fact is that women perceive those things to be more true than males. We also asked them about non-penetrative sexual practices, which I'll skip. Quite importantly, we asked them, okay, so one of the myths or misconceptions is that you've brought it onto yourself, the victim blaming. You're a woman who is sexually active and therefore you are more likely to, experience sexual abuse. Well, these are non-sexually active students, and still women were 2.6 times more likely to be ever sexually abused, or to be worried about being sexually assaulted, or also to say that they've been in relationships where things were moving too fast. We asked about values, and again, here we're comparing sort of males to females. So males, for example, were more likely to say it is fun to sexually experiment with strangers, and you don't have to be very close to your partner for sex to be a pleasant experience. So quick main points. Our findings reaffirm that gender inequalities and discriminating gender norms, and that female university students are at a higher risk of sexual violence than their male counterparts. But we should not dismiss the substantial proportion of males that have come forward and reported also that they have been sexually assaulted. Compared to male, I've copied this. So, conclusions and next steps. So definitely more research, but more calculated and evidence-driven research. So really understanding what gaps are there in order to have better youth-friendly services and youth-friendly policies at the local level, not just sort of haphazard research. We need collective and sustained efforts, and I think sustained is key here, and a comprehensive strategy for reducing levels of violence, promoting social norms that protect young people. And also young people must receive information, education, and support. And I know that many of you maybe are aware of the efforts that Dr. Kak and other people and us at the faculty have been trying in order to have a school-based sort of comprehensive sexual and reproductive health education, and not just reproductive, but also sexual health education. So we need those programs, and we need to start comprehensive sexuality education before people are sexually active. We need to start breaking those myths and misconceptions and gender, socially constructed gender, gender disparities before young people are actually subjected to them. And obviously, I think the session before talked a lot about the laws. We are doing our share. We have ongoing research. We're doing lots of trainings. We've trained 100+ school health counselors and educators on the topic, and we've had discussion forums with media experts on how to translate evidence into media. We're doing a lot of advocacy. We've created NAS, and a lot of the people here and at KIP are also stakeholders and collaborators on this initiative. It's a network of Arab scholars on sexuality and sexual health, and also we're doing a lot of outreach. So most recently we developed, through focus group discussions, 2 manuals to help parents in public schools and private schools discuss matters of sexual health with their children should they feel the need to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liliane. I'm sure many of you have questions. Please make sure that you take note of them so we can ask the panelists at the very end to address them. Next, I'd like to welcome 2 AUB graduates, actually, who are currently both at the Modern University of Business and Science and UBS. I will introduce both speakers first, but although Maddah is going to be talking on behalf of both of them. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nisreen Alwan, who's currently the Dean of the School of Health Sciences at NUBS. Dr. Alwan she was an instructor in the biology department at AUB, and after her graduation, she actually came back to AUB and worked also as a lecturer here before joining NUBS. And currently, she is conducting her research is mainly in public health and ichthyology. She can tell you more about that. I had to look it up to understand it. And she's working together with Ms. Diana Maddah on a very important research that was funded by the KIP project that they will be sharing with you today. Ms. Maddah is active in an NGO called Teach for Lebanon. And she is very passionate about working with the youth and teaching and working on developing and empowering youth in particular. And she is the winner of multiple awards from her the days of her degree here back at AUB in the School of Public Health. She launched many social campaigns with Lebanese, Syrian, Palestinian, and stateless children, and those campaigns focused on diversity, tolerance, and other human rights aspects. Today, she's going to be sharing with us a study that her and Dr. Alwan conducted, where they interviewed women in the Bekaa region, and she's going to be talking about how this affected the empowerment of these women and the youth as well in those regions. Thank you.
Overall, Lebanon, and we'll see.
Oh, okay. There's also the South. And not
Mount Lebanon.
Stick to the script, Lina.
Don't be vague. Okay, so I'll be sharing the findings of our study, which is about the perception of students towards women and the perception of women themselves about their role and the status in the Lebanese rural communities. So I'll go quickly through the introduction, I think, because we are all aware of the problem of gender inequity and that the woman is facing many problems like inappropriate protection, burden of labor, traditional gender roles and expectations. And despite the fact that education is the most important factor in order to provide better health outcomes for the family and the children, but in the Arab region, we have a very high rate of unemployment among the Arab women, and we have also a low rate of literacy also among the Arab women. And unfortunately, we only focus in the Middle East on the concept of motherhood and domesticity. And the nationality in the Arab countries is essentially patrilineal, and Lebanon is an example, and we know that. And also, unfortunately, they use the religion, specifically the Islamic religion, to say that this is right and this is wrong. So unfortunately, they misunderstood the role of religion in shaping the culture and the tradition of certain societies. In Lebanon, despite the fact that we have an improvement of the role of women in terms of economics, education, and other issues, but unfortunately, we have only 30.3% of women are engaged in the workforce. Only 8.5% out of them have higher or high managerial positions. And we are all aware of the problem of the limited political participation of the Lebanese women. The aim of the study is to investigate and compare the perception of the students, males and females, about the role of their mothers in the Lebanese rural communities, as well as the perception of the mother themselves about their role in the societies. Why we have chosen rural areas? Because we are all aware of the problem of all the Lebanese rural areas are deprived of many opportunities. So what about the role of women in these areas? This is one. Two, why new generation? Because we believe that the change begins with the new generations, and that's why we should dig into the perception of those students or those children in order to better understand why we have this perception and why they are thinking in this way. So we did this study in North Bekaa, Mount Lebanon, and South. It was a qualitative study. We did in-depth interviews, and we used 2 interview guides, one for the mothers, the other for the children. The students aged between 11 and 14, we did 34 interviews with the mothers and 35 interviews with the students, males and females. And here we have the findings. In the findings, you will see a similarity between the perception of the students with that of their mothers, and we will see, and this is alarming, and we will see why. So I will start with the students' perception. When we ask the students about their understanding of their rights, duties, and the rights and the duties and the challenges of the Lebanese rural women, all interviews in the north mentioned that both men and women should have the same rights. However, in the real life situation, males are viewed as the main guardians of the women. So my brother has a right to shout at me as he would like to. He knows better than me. This is a girl from north. Also, they believe that we are still living in a patriarchal system, and a boy from north, and we have also 3 boys from Bekaa and South, mentioned that the woman cannot go outside at night, cannot choose the outfits that she wants, that she has to obey her husband, and they are against the participation of women in politics. For them, this is not her business to do so. And also, a girl from South was not even able to distinguish between the rights and the duties in general. So when we ask them about their understanding of the challenges, we had different answers related to early marriage, conservatism in religion, going out at night, discrimination and marginalization, and other issues. So as I have mentioned in the introduction, for them, they can see the religion like a barrier that encourages gender inequity, but in fact, as I had mentioned before, indeed they didn't understand the role of religion. And when we ask them about, here also I have to mention that when we ask them about raising the children in their home, they mentioned that they can see the difference between raising a son and raising a daughter. So when we ask them about who's the main decision maker at home, so they mentioned, half of them mentioned that their father is the main decision maker, while the other half mentioned that both mother and father are the main decision makers, but for the big decisions, this is the father, because for them he's more mature. So my husband will be more mature, a man is usually more mature. This is also a girl from South. When we ask them about who's the role model, the majority mentioned that the mother is the role model because she's taking care of them, and but one boy from South mentioned that his father is the main decision maker because he has the power and the bravery to do whatever he wants. When we asked them about their understanding of women empowerment, we had different answers related to education, employment, support from husbands. So we knew that some of them had this knowledge about the women's empowerment. Moving to the mother's perception, when we ask the mother themselves about their understanding of their rights and the duties and the challenges, The majority mentioned that unfortunately we have in Lebanon this superficial sense of freedom, but in real life situation this is not the case. In South, the majority of mothers mentioned that it's not the role of a woman to be the main breadwinner. She cannot be politically active. This is not her role. If she is not there, who will be taking care of the children? A woman should not play the role of a man. This is a mother from South. And also in the South, they differentiate between traditional women and modern women. For them, the traditional woman, she's the one that broke the limits and went to the city, continued her education, and got a job and stayed there. But the traditional woman, she's the one who's taking care of her children. Also, the barriers and the challenges mentioned, education, participation in political activities, being socially active and other issues, and also early marriage and religion. And here we have something alarming because they mention early marriage as a barrier. At the same time, they will encourage early marriage for their daughters, especially in North, because for them it will be like a solution for the oppression and subordination if the groom is wealthy. So if the groom is wealthy, they will encourage the daughter to get married. So they link also their oppression with the economic status. For the religion again, as women, they are supposed to be conservative in choosing their outfit, in dealing with other gender, in going out at night, and allowing their daughters to go to the city to continue their education or fighting against violence. So from the point of view of religion, girls should only spend the night at home and not in any other place. This is a mother from Becca. Also, when we ask them about raising the children, also they mentioned that raising a boy for them is different than raising a girl. Also, the majority of mothers mentioned that they cannot even elect without the permission of their husbands. If they want to participate in the election, they should obey their husband's decision on whom to elect. When we went to see their roles in the society, we had 54 women. 16 out of them were educated. 5 are working as teachers and socially active. 1 is working in agriculture, and the other 18 didn't even reach the first year of university. Why? Because of lack of access of social organization, educational organizations, lack of family support from parents and from husband, and being very busy doing the household work. Okay. For the worker mother, they mentioned that they are being like role models for their daughters. And when we ask them about who's the decision maker, also the majority mentioned that both mothers and fathers are the main decision maker. Only 2 mentioned from North and Mount Lebanon that the man is the decision maker, and they are satisfied with that. I'm satisfied because my husband is the decision maker, so I'll not be blamed for any mistake that might happen at home. When we asked them whether they are satisfied or not, 11 women mentioned that they are not satisfied. 6 mothers mentioned that yes, they are satisfied because they can see their ambition through their children, and 17 didn't answer this question. When we asked them about their understanding of empowerment, so according to them, they mentioned that to be financially independent, to prevent early marriage, to participate in different workshops, training, to get the skills needed, to integrate men in all these activities is very crucial. In addition, they mentioned that media should play a role in order to highlight the facts of these rural women or women who are living in rural areas, so they can fight to get their rights. As a recommendation, we should intervene at a different level of the ecological model, and despite the fact that lobbying and advocating, as they mentioned early in the morning, is very important, but also we should work, out of this study we conclude that we should work on the mindset, attitude, behavior of the students and of the children. We can do that by integrating the NGOs, international NGOs, by doing a lot of workshops, training, and also to create more jobs in rural areas is very needed in order to overcome the challenge of the presence of Syrian women also who are present in the villages, and we have this competition between the Lebanese women and the Syrian women, and also schools are the best place to intervene with the students, to give them all the knowledge, skills, attitude needed in order to let them to tackle issues related to rights, duty, citizenship, the role of women, gender equity, and other issues. And also parents should be part of these activities. As a part of the project, we tried to pilot one of these recommendations. So we did like a workshop or a training in one of these villages. It was divided into two groups or into two parts with the mothers. We did that about leadership, human rights, body image and self-esteem, economic justice, and with the students about human rights, women's rights and duties. And we had very good feedback because actually it was a good platform for them to express their opinions and to express their challenges. So as conclusion, so women is still facing many challenges that prevent her from empowerment, like religion, culture, early marriage and other issues. And males are viewed, as I had mentioned previously, as guardians of a woman. And according to many, sons were more valued than daughters. And as we have concluded that the perception of the students are like the reflection of that of their mothers. So intervening or adopting healthy child rearing practices at the early age is very important in order to ensure the presence of a generation who believes in the potential of the mother and her crucial role in the society. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana and Nesrine, for this extremely valuable study. We need more and more work like this. Now we're going to move back to the context of AUB with our last two speakers who are going to be talking about a related topic, but we have still two more presentations. I'm going to start with Ms. Trudy Hodges. Trudy is actually AUB's first Title IX coordinator, was hired in 2014. Before joining AUB, Trudy was a consultant to major projects funded by USAID, US Department of State, and UNICEF, and she finalized a constitutional reform project as chief of party based in Baghdad. Trudy is a founding board member of Right to Nonviolence. This is a Lebanese NGO that's concerned mainly with human rights, advocacy for human rights, nonviolence resistance, and empowerment of youth, mainly through educational scholarships. Trudy, today she's going to be talking to us mainly about the institutional challenges and difficulties such as underreporting and resistance to change when it comes to tackling the issue of sexual harassment at the university, at AUB in particular. Trudy, join me in welcoming her.
It's afternoon now, huh? Okay, good afternoon. So now I have to find my presentation. Yeah. So we flipped the schedule a little bit. I'm coordinator. I was appointed in June 2014. In fact, I wasn't dedicated full time. I'm not even dedicated full time to it now, if the truth is told. I do other things around equity and integrity issues. Wait a minute. Okay. So basically, I'm going to just briefly show you a sort of snapshot of AUB's non-discrimination policy framework. It's just one slide, so don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with too many details, as much as I probably would like to. And also how that overlaps with Title IX. The earlier discussion, the legal discussion, was really interesting to me because basically, this is AUB's policy framework for non-discrimination. And we have all these protected bases. So that means you can't discriminate against someone on any of those protected bases. And the overlap with Title IX is the sex, gender identity. So Title IX is a very historic and landmark civil rights law that was passed in 1972. Originally, it was just an employment discrimination law. There were a lot of female PhDs who they weren't being hired. So, women were going to university and getting their PhDs and no one would hire them. Anyway, so it was originally employment discrimination. And what happened later is the law, actually case law, changed it so that sexual harassment and sexual violence became defined as a form of sex discrimination. Anyway, that's how the law evolved in the US, so it's going to be interesting to see what approach ultimately is taken in Lebanon. So I think it's not fair for me to stand up here and talk about the work that we're doing around, sorry, I'm going to go back for just a minute. So it does cover everything, so Title IX covers everything from employment discrimination to sexual harassment to sexual violence. Okay, so it covers this whole spectrum. It's broadly applicable. It protects students, faculty, and staff. It protects patients and visitors to campus. So it's a very powerful law. It's remedial. So if things don't work inside, you can also go outside to the Office of Civil Rights actually and make a complaint. Of course, we hope that you would talk to us first. So I think it's really not fair for me to stand up here and talk about the work that we've been trying to do, which is really establish sort of a foundational program to respond to actual incidents of harassment and discrimination, whether it's a formal, informal process or a formal panel investigation, and without talking about all the work that was done previously. So basically, the first policies were put in place in 2003 after a task force was formed by then President John Waterbury. And Brigitte, you were on that task force, right? So Brigitte has, I don't know if it's a dubious distinction or not, I think of being on all three task forces that have looked at these issues over the years. So the first policies were put in place in 2003. They were updated in 2012, and they really, it was crucial when I came in that I had this very, sound base from which to work. Brigitte had also kept orientations going so that, despite the fact that there wasn't an institutional office or officer sort of working on education awareness and training like we do now, she was somehow filling that gap. I'm not sure how with everything else she does. The first institutional integrity report is important, and it's online. I think because it was the first time that AEB ever published any data. Now you're going to see and you're going to say, well, that's not much, and you're right. But I think just the fact that we published data for the first time is something important. Okay, what's it doing? Sorry. Okay. And then the policy working group that President Ӧyry mentioned this morning, we just, Brigitte chaired this policy working group. We worked for a year. We developed recommendations to the institutional structure, to the resources and staffing, and to the policies and practices of how we address discrimination and harassment at AEB. We just made recommendations to the president. We hope that he endorses most of them, and then there'll be a period where we have to try to translate that into policy and ultimately practice. Okay, how am I doing on time? Not very well. Okay, so I just want to give you a little snapshot. Lilian spoke about the prevalence of harassment and sexual violence, on campuses. I think this was a major study that was done by the Association of American Universities, 27 campuses. So for the first time, you had data where you could compare. Now, if you look at the reported rate of harassment, it's really high. For me, I have to think that there's some self-selection going on in this, as well as it depends on how you define sexual harassment. So if you really are interested in this, you have to go into the data and see. You have to see how that compares to other studies where they may have defined things differently. But still, I think at least it gives us, it's the biggest study. I mean, it's the largest study of multiple campuses. So it gives us sort of a snapshot of something that we could think about. What is also important from somebody like me who works, from within this institution is that for every incident that was reported to a campus official, 12 were not. These were things that happened on campus. So we know that underreporting is a problem everywhere. It's not just here. Okay. So what do we know from the data that we have at AEB? When I arrived, they asked me to do a report, an institutional integrity report, so I said, but don't we want to put some data in there? And basically, this is what I could gather of what had been reported to either the provost or president's office for academic year 13-14. There were like 18 cases. I call it cases instead of incidents, because there could be multiple incidents related to one case, and I'm not going to count, if the person did 5, actions. So, wait, why is it doing this on its own? I guess it's telling me to speed up. So here, clearly we can see that in 2016-17, there's been an uptick in reports. And I would give, we now have a GA, Alison Finch. She's done an amazing job doing student outreach and creating a Title IX Student Action Committee. And the other, the program, I have to give also credit, KIP has been amazing in supporting our work and really, forming a real partnership with what we're doing and supporting us whenever they could. So these two things, I think the coincidence of these two things this year have finally put Title IX and this work a little bit more to the forefront. So, okay, now these are from actual cases at AUB. I'll just let you read them. Now, we're just going to get a bit more into the details of some of the patterns, some of the things we do know. The reality is we still don't have enough data. We do finally have a comprehensive climate survey for students that's now approved by RIB. So we will have some data, more comprehensive data in the future. We're just going to talk about patterns. I just want to go through there's many challenges to this work. The goal essentially is to create a safe environment for students and for staff and for faculty, for the whole community. There's a lot of challenges. I'm just going to touch on 3 main challenges. So of course there's the underreporting. Okay, I went from Mac to PC and it was faster on that. Unfortunately, fear is a big word and people don't believe that. When I tell somebody in senior leadership that students are afraid or that faculty or staff are afraid to report, they actually don't believe it. They're like, no, they're so empowered. Well, yes, they are empowered, and that's wonderful, but actually they are afraid. And there is a lot of fear of reporting for different reasons. There's also widespread just lack of awareness of what's not allowed, of what's prohibited, of what's inappropriate, and the fact that we have policies, and if you're a faculty or managerial staff, that you're obligated to report. So these are all things we're working on. Students often say, we just don't think any action will be taken. I don't think that that perception is totally unfounded. I think there have been too many times where action wasn't taken. I'll be frank. We're also trying to improve in that sense. Of course, there's always privacy and confidentiality concerns, and the perception that some people are just untouchable. So one of the big things has been the lack of data. The Campus Climate Survey, of course, will help with that. When I arrived, I didn't have cases. I said, okay, where are the previous cases? What can I see? What happened? It wasn't centralized. It wasn't, so I really couldn't go back and see to detect any sort of patterns or see how should we try to build up the program. We're working on all these things. So all these areas we're working on. And then the gender equity assessment, of course, for the first time, there was a task force on the lives and careers of women faculty. I served on that task force. And so now we do have some baseline data. Much more is still needed. And you need to do these equity assessments at the departmental level, actually, or the unit level. You need to not just look, faculty level or institutional level. So in terms of process, we use a panel process. It involves faculty and staff. It's really time intensive. And it's difficult logistically. There's required training. We have legal limitations in terms of employee sanctions. We should have talked to the lawyers about that earlier. There's an issue of inconsistent sanctions and remedies across employee groups. Once you give sanctions, how do you monitor it? How do you make sure that they're implemented? Because that's actually a decentralized process. And then the confidentiality of the process actually leads people to believe that nothing is happening, that no action has been taken. And so this, Okay, so just a few things that have been happening recently. The president has been extremely supportive. He mandated in-person training for all employees on these issues. We've trained 600 people today. The policy working group, as I mentioned, that Brigitte chaired. For the first time, we got some dedicated funds for programming. Funding for a graduate assistant, Allison, who's really been amazing. A third-party reporting platform, so people don't feel comfortable to report in the typical ways. This is independent. An action committee. I wish I'd put a picture in there of them. I'm so sorry about that. We launched online training for students. Some of them are really happy about it, some not so much. We hope to launch the campus climate survey in April or May. There's an awareness campaign coming up, online training for faculty and staff. We plan to upset everyone in the institution. And we have an expert coming from the US to do training for Title IX deputies and panel members, because we're going to implement a structure where we'll have a deputy faculty member in each faculty and in some of the key units to support all of this work. And there's the contacts, and I'm told to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Trudy. And it's always great to see how AUB always sets an example of how other organizations also what can they do in a context where there's lack of legislation to protect employees against sexual harassment. Next, I'm going to introduce Dr. Brigitte Őyry, who's an associate professor and clinical psychologist at the psychiatry department here at AUB, and she's also the director of clinical psychology training program. So all our clinical psychologists go through Dr. Brigitte. Dr. Őyry is very, she's a huge contributor to the field of psychology and the practice of psychology in Lebanon. She is the founding president of the Lebanese Psychological Association and the founding board member of the Arab Union for Psychological Science. And she actually, as Trudy said, she served on the first task force in 2000 and the second task force in 2010 for harassment and discrimination. And now she is the chair of the Gender Equity and Title IX Working Group. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brigitte.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for KIP. For having organized this wonderful 2 days and to have been so supportive in our work. Just out of curiosity, how many of you knew of what has been going on at AUB and Title IX and all of that? Just to see that, Trudy, how much work we still have to do. So I'm glad a lot of you are here just to see what has been going on and how important this work is actually for AUB to be the safe place we want it to be. Sexual harassment is everywhere, by the way, in every society, across genders, across social groups, ethnicities, religions. It is not related to youth. It's not related to attractiveness. Sometimes we've heard some harassers who say, no, but she's not even my type, why would I harass her? Okay, but that's not the point. It is very much an issue of power and hierarchy, more than sexuality, actually. Sexuality comes later. So why are we here? Because it is our responsibility as faculty, as staff, to make AUB a safe place and a safe environment for everybody and all AUB community and members who are part of it. That's why we need to have policies and procedures to protect the AUB community and sanction the harasser. I can tell you AUB is, as far as I know, the first university in the Arab region to have such policies. So this is really forefront leading into such issues. So we really need to be vigilant, not only in terms, sanctioning, but also in preventing and bringing up awareness and advocacy against such matters. This is the table that Trudy put. I just want to show you the difference in bar graphs. So, of course, it's our own reported harassment case, but the sexual harassment really leads in this. And I think for many reasons. One is sexual harassment involves psychological, emotional, verbal sometimes, but it's also the one that people come through the foremost The other types of harassment are much more difficult to pinpoint and prove. Psychological or emotional harassment is very difficult to actually identify and prove and come forward with. So sexual, this is why the sexual one is the most common, but also there's a lot of underreporting. I mean, what we see is barely the tip of the iceberg. And we're already overwhelmed, so I'd imagine if we get even more, but I think it's very important to provide safe platforms and places for people to come through. Who are the victims at UB? Who are the people who are most at risk? Young female students, graduate female students, so you get from both ends. And young female students, so kind of the early ones entering freshman and sophomores, because they're young and a lot of times they don't know the system yet, and they want to do the best that they can. And when it comes to graduate female students, because they work very closely with faculty. So when you're a graduate student, you work very closely with your supervisor, with your advisor, sometimes over weekends, late at night. I know my graduate students, you're really very close to the faculty, which a lot of times gives way to such behaviors. Female students coming from outside Beirut, and this has been actually an interesting trend we observed. These are the students who have no support network around them, their families are far, they live alone, they know very few people, and they become prey to these staff or faculty. Interestingly, foreign Western students, and they could be also non-foreign but from a Western country, with this old myth that Western women are easy and close, and of course they will not say no to any sexual advances. So we've had several cases where we've had actually exchange students or foreign students who were subjected to that. Young female faculty, and remember the power issue, and remember that senior faculty and chair people have to vote on promotions, on contracts, extensions, etc., etc. So that also makes them very vulnerable. Now, I'm not trying to, discourage anyone from applying to UB, please. But just to say that young female faculty are also among, the vulnerable groups. And we've had cases when, you have the senior person in the department taking under his wing this young female, and then things start happening. Female staff, of course, by default are also. Now, the pattern is mostly male to female harassment, which is seen pretty much everywhere. However, and a big however here, it doesn't mean that within genders this is not happening, because it is happening. So male to male, female to female, or to trans, or to any of the LGBTQ community. It can be either way also. I have heard of cases where male students try to intimidate female faculty because of a bad grade or whatever. So this does happen, but it's much less frequent and it's much less reported. Remember, for the LGBTQ, there's also the sensitivity of if the person reports it, then the person is also coming out to faculty or to staff or to the panel, and that also makes it very difficult. So what do we see? So initially, the process observed, the initial phase of the victims, I'm going to call them, or the complainants, is shock. Because you're in a safe environment, this is AUB, it's university, things like that don't happen. I believed it too until I got involved in this process. So shock of this is happening, disbelief, and thoughts like, no, maybe he didn't mean it, he doesn't know, the misinterpretation, I saw it differently, it's not really what he wants, he didn't actually say sex. He didn't, So ignoring it, denying it, minimizing it at home. It's okay, it's kind of, it happened once, it's not important. And then waiting for it to go away. And I always say harassment is like a noise in the car. It doesn't go away, it gets worse until you take it to the mechanic, right? So this is exactly it, it does not go away. And usually it does get worse. And what happens is, the complainants start avoiding classes or places or meetings or situations. A very high rate of absenteeism is seen, procrastination, not going to office hours if they need to be, trying not to ask questions, trying not to be, sitting in the back of the class, all that. I started feeling bad when going to UB, and we hear this a lot of times, that every time I started stepping into campus, I get nauseated, I get a bad feeling, AUB becomes kind of, the trigger of a trauma almost. That you go in here and this is how you feel. This is where bad things happen. Later on, what happens? They feel more down. Their studying or their work is affected. Their relationships can become getting affected with colleagues, with friends, with peers, with partners. And then, sometimes, they bring up a topic with a close friend or somebody in the class, or somebody, we've also seen it in the class, somebody would say, you know, he really picks at you a lot and he's always making comments about your looks in class. And so that sometimes gives some leeway for the person to start talking. They may go to counseling, and I want you to know that counseling records are fully confidential, so we actually have no access. We don't know how many will go to complain about that. And what has, most of the time, the way they have come and reached us is talking to a trusted faculty member from any department. Sometimes they're, you know, let's say in engineering, but they've taken one course in philosophy and they like the teacher, so they go to her and they tell her, this is what happened to me. And this is where it's our role to really inform faculty of what to do. Because we've had times where the faculty didn't know what to do. And they start calling and asking. So informing them that there is a process and they can guide the student into the proper places, the proper offices, is very helpful. Usually they are given advice, and this is why the training of deputies, and there will be in every faculty several deputies who will be key people that students can go to, or staff or faculty. They're given advice and usually refer to Title 9, which means Trudy. Then, so they talk to her and she explains the policies and procedures, and then if it's possible, an informal resolution is always what is preferred. So depending on the extent, the intensity, the frequency of the behavior, things sometimes can be remedied. Sometimes the person said something and he really didn't mean it to come across that way. So if it is possible to have informally, then of course we would use it. But a lot of the times, by the time the students come to us, there's been a lot of behaviors and a pattern, sometimes years. We're talking a year, 2 years, 3 years of a certain pattern of behavior. Then the options are given, including having a formal complaint. When a formal complaint is given to the president, a panel is formed of faculty, staff, you know, whomever, and then the investigation is initiated. What happens? The panel writes the report, submits the recommendation to the president. The president is the one who decides about the action taken. Okay, so the panel just recommends, and then it's up to him to decide. And then the action, hopefully, is implemented. We've had cases when it comes to staff, the Lebanese labor law does not help us. Because the Lebanese labor law, for example, I don't know what law they used, but it was basically, this action was, well, he's suspended 3 days from the office. This is the maximum they could. It's like, how is that possible? That's like a long weekend. You know? But and that's the problem, is that a lot of times our recommendations and what the president wants to do is really limited as compared for staff because of the labor law. Almost done. So the challenges for the complainant, the social stigma, of course, is very strong. What the family will think, the friends, what the other faculty will say, would that jeopardize her relationship with other faculty? Fear of being blamed, I think it's been across a pattern of all of the speakers. They're being affected academically, personally, psychologically, and emotionally. And there's a ton of literature about what is the impact of harassment on the victims. Now, the reactions are interesting because they diverge. It can either be the fear of hurting the harasser. What if he loses his job? What if they kick him out? What if his reputation is ruined? You know, and this is usually coming more from the young victims. Like, I don't want to ruin his family. What if his wife knows? And I'm like, are you serious? Trying to say, well, no, never mind, you know. But then the older victims are, like, I want him to be punished. I want him to suffer. I want him. And there is also a certain sense of, I want to protect others. And this is very important. Like, if we let this person go, or if we do not sanction him, then other students who have been maybe already for years being victims of that person are going to continue being victims. And this is, of course, you know, what we hear a lot from the older ones. The environmental challenges, the fear of the breach of confidentiality, what if everybody knows? And I always ask them, have you heard of any investigation happening, any panel at AUB for the past, you know, whatever, 4 or 5 years? And they say, No, we haven't. That's exactly right, because it's most, we try to keep it as confidential as possible. Fear of nothing being done, and this is very prominent. I'm going to say nothing's going to happen. This is AUB, this is Beirut, this is Lebanon. Nothing happens. Everybody gets away with everything. That's not true. We're here to try to put an end to that, actually. Fear of no consequences to the harasser, nothing is going to happen. He is one of the untouchables, so he cannot be touched. And I say everybody can be reached. This is not true. And of course, fear of retaliation. The last slide, harassment 2.0. This is what we're facing now, and this is going to make our tasks even more difficult. The online harassment, internet-based social media. We need adapted policies. Actually, we did include in the last revision cyber harassment and internet-based. But now we need another level of training and up-to-date knowledge, and of course including cyber hygiene in the awareness. How should students actually handle WhatsApp and emails and pictures? Just I can tell you, 2 days ago, 3 of my daughter's class and at school got suspended because they were writing nasty WhatsApps about the teachers. So that tells you, where we're heading. Anyway, this is just the beginning of a long road, and your presence and support is very important to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brigitte, and thank you to all our speakers. This whole panel has been very inspiring, and we learned a lot from them. And please, if I can now direct the questions to the audience. We have approximately 4 minutes.
How come on this sexual orientation is not listed when we all know how vulnerable and marginalized and how much violence members of the LGBT community face?
So basically, it's a legitimate question. Our protected bases, race, religion, sex, gender identity, are informed by US law. That's just the truth of it. And there's no federal law yet in the US that protects against discrimination against sexual orientation. There's 22 states that have laws, okay? And same-sex marriage is now allowed. That's a federal law. So the law is evolving, but we didn't have it. It wasn't in the US law, and so it wasn't put in as a specific base. Now, the policy working group, it's one of our key recommendations, and to our knowledge, Brigitte can maybe agree or not, it's endorsed by the president. So you want to add something, Brigitte?
Yeah, as I said, this has been, this has been highlighted actually because it wasn't included before. And that and the internet base. So it has been approved by the president, presented the report, and this will be part of the new policies. So discrimination based on sex and gender and sexual orientation. So it's there.
Thank you very much. Sorry, because we have other questions and very limited time. So if we can take can someone please give the mic to the lady here?
Because we had the courage to tackle this problem from all levels, government and at the campus. And what happens here happens everywhere else, but here we are more serious to tackle the problems. My question is, and inquiries is, how much % of the harassers are males versus females? Because it is important, since from the session in the morning, it is important to highlight this, because although it is possible to have it transsexual, but I think lots of harassers are males rather than females, but the victims are most of the time females. This is one. For the Dr. Maddah and Alwan, they concentrated on the rural differences between mothers and the students and whatever. I wonder whether they did any study on the urban population, because I don't know how much difference there might be between rural and urban. And from our work in the fields and other things regarding gender and social roles of women and men, we didn't find much difference, but maybe there it would be more helpful if it comes from a organization or educational center like AUB. My other question is, if I'm allowed.
One last question, please.
Yes, that's the last one. Yeah, I think I covered that all. Sometimes harassment goes under bullying, and bullying is treated differently than sexual harassment, especially in schools, high schools, elementaries, and throughout. Is there any way it differs? And one more question to Dr. Brigitte. We talked about the effect on the person, her or himself, but how much difference is the society, or does the society handle the victim when it is male or when it is female? Thank you, and sorry for the long question.
Actually, yes, we have targeted the rural areas because out of our experience dealing with the students in rural areas, because I'm working at Teach for Lebanon, so we're dealing with the students living in rural areas and underprivileged areas. Those people are, they don't have this exposure to quality of education, they don't have access, even physical access, as I had mentioned in my presentation, to social organizations, to institutions, educational institutions. That's why we have focused on this area, because we believe that they are deprived of many opportunities. So what about the role of women there? And we figured out that yes, we have big issues related to many things because of the lack of access to different platforms and different opportunities that the urban woman maybe she might get them.
Dr. Hamdoud, do you have also?
I just wanted to,
The JSHS, the section on sexual and reproductive health, was dropped for Lebanon at the time. Okay. It's reintroduced now in 2016, but the percentage that I found was actually under bullying, and it was one of the different types of bullying, so we looked into them and we saw that one of the types of bullying was making sexual comments and jokes. So just to support what the lady said, that sometimes we need to dig into the bullying. And I also want to commend her for pointing out that the reason we have data from AUB is not because that the situation is only at AUB, but I have tried tirelessly to repeat the same online survey across multiple different university campuses on Lebanon, and none of them would actually give access to their students to actually collect this kind of data. I should probably say that the only university that was very much willing was the Lebanese university, but due to the fact that this was an online survey and they don't use particularly emails to communicate with their students, it was difficult to replicate the same study and the same methodology. But many private universities were approached, all of them said no, and hence we're left with the AUB student population only.
Dr. Ӧyry? Yeah, about the society's reaction. Well, of course, I mean, society by default blames the woman and, what did you do, etc. This is why awareness is very important. However, for the women concerned, having a social support is the key for them to be able to go through this very difficult period, because it gets very personal questions are asked, patterns are asked. So getting the support, for example, for students, the support of their parents is very important. And I can tell you, parents have been very supportive. So far as I know, nobody has condemned the student. So we have a long way to go. Awareness is very important, advocacy is very important, but we need to start listening, of course, more to the victim's voice.
We are running out of time, so I would like to just give the last minute to Dr. Khalaf to share with us another narrative that she knew she doesn't have time to share, but she wanted to. So, yes.
I don't know how long it will take, though. It's actually two narratives. Maybe I'll just talk about them briefly. One is one of my students who was sexually abused by her grandfather at age 9. And the story starts with her going to the bathroom to run the bath water, and how he asked her to come and sit on his lap. And I just want to share the first part of it, and just so that you see what the effect that it's had on her. No one knows about this, and I would prefer that it stay this way. What I'm about to write is nothing short of my deepest and darkest secret that I have carried with me since the day it happened. You would think not me, never me, when it happened. I don't know what it was. I didn't know what it was, I just knew it was wrong. He's in a wheelchair now. I almost feel bad for him. But what I do know is that men are no longer human to me, and I have sealed myself shut. And she goes on to describe what he actually did to her and how that affected her life. The second narrative is by a student who talks about her boyfriend who was bipolar and sexually abusive, and so he would be nice to her one day, shower her with gifts and kind words, and the next day he would literally rape her. He would force himself on her. And she talked about how this was important to her in terms of social standing in school, that he protected her, he was older than she was, he gave her confidence, he gave her presence, visibility at school and in the community. And her narrative is not only about what she went through with him, but about the struggle she had to actually free herself from his dominance. I'm sorry I don't have time to read them, but they are all very powerful. And one thing I noted is that our panelists have been talking about sexual harassment on campus. What's interesting to me is that most of my students have not mentioned this at all. What they write about is how they were sexually harassed before they came to campus. So just an interesting observation that not everything happens at the university level. This has obviously happened to them way before. Thank you.
Thank you again to all our panelists.